facial expression you see everywhere now. Brows slightly pinched, mouth tight, eyes glazed, thumb scrolling like it's trying to dig for oil. It's the universal face of modern outrage. Everyone seems furious, and what is worse is that everyone seems to enjoy being furious. Americans feel it, Brits feel it, and even the Canadians, who are basically the emotional support Labradors of geopolitics, are losing patience. A recent Pew survey found that 55% of Americans say politics makes them feel angry, and 65% say it makes them feel exhausted. In the UK, Ofcom reports that more than half of adults get news primarily from social media, which is the fastest possible delivery system for emotion and the slowest possible delivery system for context. Unsurprisingly, people also say that this constant drip feed of anger leaves them feeling overwhelmed, nihilistic, and permanently on edge. So here's the question I want to answer properly. Why does modern life feel like a permanent rage festival? And why is outrage so addictive that we keep coming back for more, even when it ruins our mood, our focus, and our sense of reality? I'm going to explain it in this video without sugarcoating the truth, without pretending everyone is equally guilty, and certainly without leaning on both sides' arguments unless the evidence actually demands it. We're living in a rage economy, and someone is profiting. But before we start, I need to make a quick clarification. This isn't one of those lazy sermons where the whole argument is technology is ruining us. People love blaming the phone, the apps, Gen Z, or the media as if those are magical villains with no human beings behind them. The reality is more precise and more unsettling than that. Modern outrage lives at the intersection of human psychology, digital architecture, and political incentives, which means it's a perfect storm built by people who understand exactly how your brain works and how to hijack it. In the US, scholars at NYU Center for Social Media and Politics have shown that political content coded as high arousal, meaning anger, disgust, and indignation, spreads far faster than neutral content. In Britain, Reuters Institute data shows news avoidance is now at record highs, with 41% of people deliberately avoiding the news because it feels too negative or exhausting. So we end up trapped in a very modern kind of loop. People hate the outrage, but it's the only thing the system keeps serving. Now, outrage is not new. Humans have always felt moral outrage, which is anger directed at wrongdoing, injustice, or threats to the group. Psychologist Molly Crockett describes it as an ancient social emotion, a kind of internal alarm system that helps groups enforce norms like fairness and cooperation. Outrage itself is not the villain. If you see someone abusing power, lying, or harming others, outrage is an entirely reasonable human response. Historically, outrage fueled positive change, from civil rights to women's suffrage to labor protections. The twist is that modern digital outrage is not the same thing as the righteous anger that toppled tyrants. What we're living in now is outrage as content. It's constant, performative, optimized for clicks, depersonalized, and often detached from actual harm. A helpful way to think about it is to compare historic outrage with algorithmic outrage. Historically, outrage had friction, it had costs. You had to show up somewhere, put your name to it, face consequences, and deal with your own community afterwards. It was tied to real relationships and real accountability. Online outrage, by contrast, has almost no friction at all. You can condemn someone while half asleep in a comment section you'll never revisit, aimed at people you will never actually meet. It's moral condemnation without commitment, which is why it becomes casual and constant. There's research on this too. One study in psychological science found that when people express moral outrage online without personal cost, they tend to become more extreme over time because they learn they can signal virtue without any risk, basically. So it's not that outrage spreads faster online, it's that the internet removes the brakes that normally regulate human anger. As the media scholar Whitney Phillips has put it, the structure of the internet rewards the loudest voices, not the most truthful ones. So why does outrage feel good, even when it's ruining you? This is the part that people hate admitting because it sounds morally embarrassing, but it's true. Outrage can feel good. You know that feeling when someone leaves a nasty comment and you clap back with something that feels sharp and victorious? That satisfaction is not only psychological, it's neurochemical. Studies have found that anger can activate the brain's reward circuitry, including regions like the ventral striatum, which are also implicated in reward-seeking behaviors. Other research suggests aggressive retaliation can be reinforcing because the brain learns to associate it with a kind of payoff. In plain English, anger can feel rewarding, especially when other people validate it. And what is social media if not a global machine built around instant validation? The loop is simple. Something triggers you, you get angry, you express it, you get a hit of engagement or approval, and your brain learns to repeat that behavior. Over time, your nervous system starts learning a dangerous equation. Outrage equals attention, which equals status, which equals reward. This is how anger stops being a reaction and becomes a strategy. And here's another algorithmic reality. Anger makes platforms money. The modern internet runs on one rule. If it keeps you on the platform, it wins. Not is it true or is it fair, and certainly not is it good for civic life. The only question is whether you clicked, watched, and commented. Humans react faster and more intensely to anger than to calm information, so anger is one of the most reliable ways to generate engagement. Platforms have known this for years. Internal research at major companies has repeatedly warned that divisive content and moral outrage drive interaction. Former Twitter data analysis found that outrage-laced posts received more engagement. Facebook's internal discussions, later reported through whistleblower disclosures, warned that algorithms can exploit the brain's attraction to divisiveness. Recommendation systems from TikTok to YouTube have repeatedly been criticized for rewarding high arousal content because it produces rapid engagement spikes and longer watch time. So put simply, calm content rarely goes viral, but fury does. And that's not a side effect, it is the business model. Why does the attention economy have no incentive to calm down? Well, because social media platforms and news outlets are locked in a competition for your attention, and attention is a finite resource they can monetize. The more time you spend outraged, the more ads you see, the more you comment angrily, and the more other users are dragged into the argument. The more polarized you become, the more predictable your clicks become, because you keep returning to content that confirms your side's narrative and demonizes the other one. This is why everything now feels like a crisis. We get breaking banners for stories that are not actually breaking, headlines engineered to provoke fear or anger, pundits monetizing conflict, creators rewarded for being inflammatory, and politicians incentivized to say extreme things because it cuts through. Herbert Simon predicted decades ago that a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention, and outrage is the perfect attention grabber because it's sharp, emotional, and simple. It cuts through the noise faster than nuance ever can. There's also a very practical media reality sitting underneath all of this. Modern newsrooms in the US and the UK have been under sustained financial pressure for years. Advertising revenue collapsed across the industry, so outlets pivoted towards subscriptions and engagement-driven models. The ugly truth is that emotional stories sell, and threat-based framing reliably lifts clicks. That doesn't mean every journalist is cynical or malicious. It means the system rewards the framing that keeps people emotionally hooked. We are online long enough for this to reshape us. This would be less serious if people were only exposed to it occasionally, but they're not. Globally, the average person now spends hours a day on social media, and in the UK, adults spend more than 4 hours a day online, according to Ofcom. In the US, most adults use platforms like YouTube and Facebook, and daily TikTok use is especially high among younger people. This is not an odd scroll, it's sustained exposure frequent enough to shape emotional reflexes. Psychologists call it emotional contagion, which is the spread of emotions through networks. A decade ago, Facebook's own experiment demonstrated that tweaking feeds could shift users' emotional states without them noticing. That was 10 years ago, when these systems were less advanced than they are actually now. Smartphones have also raised the boredom windows that used to give your nervous system a break. Sitting on a bus, waiting in a queue, going to the toilet, lying in bed before sleep, all of those moments have become micro opportunities for emotional stimulation. Research from King's College London has suggested people unlock their phones dozens of times a day, often in short bursts, creating constant emotional interruptions. Those micro interruptions add up to a nervous system that is always half agitated and never fully at rest. Anger fits perfectly into those tiny windows because it's high arousal and instantly engaging. That is how a society becomes irritable without even noticing it. So why does politics now feel like a bar fight? In both Britain and America, politics has increasingly become an emotional sport. It's less about persuasion and more about spectacle. Pew surveys have repeatedly found that large majorities of Americans describe political life in negative terms, using words like exhausting and disastrous. In the UK, measures of trust in institutions have fallen sharply in recent years across multiple surveys and indexes, and the post-Brexit, post-COVID era has not exactly repaired that damage. Politicians understand this. Anger mobilizes people, it raises money, it drives turnout, and it pushes voters into more predictable tribal patterns. There's a body of research suggesting anger increases political participation, and other work links anger-driven environments to stronger support for tough candidates and more punitive attitudes. That is why your feeds are full of alarmist headlines, moral panic videos, culture war bait, and we are under attack narratives. It's not only because people care, it's because outrage is politically efficient. Campaigns know it too. Analysis of political fundraising emails have found that fear and anger language is extremely common precisely because it increases donations. Outrage also creates identity clarity. If you're angry at the right things, you're considered loyal. If you're not angry enough, you become suspect. So political discourse stops feeling like debate and starts feeling like emotional roleplay. Then there's the performance of outrage and why people get worse online. This is the part no one enjoys admitting. Some people love being angry because it gives them an identity. Digital outrage offers status, belonging, a clear enemy, moral certainty, social approval, and content that performs well. If you've ever watched someone react theatrically to a headline they didn't read, or stitch a clip with a furious monologue about something that didn't happen, you're not watching civic engagement. You're watching a performance. Researchers sometimes call this outrage performance, and it can be extremely profitable. Calm doesn't trend. Nuance doesn't get shared. Oh, that's complicated doesn't build a huge audience. So creators dial up the fury, followers mirror the style, and everyone else starts feeling pressure to match the tone just to be heard. It becomes rage as aesthetics and rage as a business model. Some research in social media and society and adjacent fields that suggests that emotionally intense content can be rewarded with higher visibility, which creates a pressure loop. If you want to reach, you learn that you must perform. If you perform, you escalate. Over time, creators who started off fairly reasonable can become more dramatic, not because their beliefs are challenged, but because the algorithm taught them that mildness equals invisibility. So why does outrage leave you empty, even if you still crave it? The great irony is that outrage can give you a hit while hollowing you out. It tends to produce anxiety, fatigue, cynicism, compulsive scrolling, reduced concentration, and emotional numbing. Researchers found that even brief exposure to negative news can worsen mood for hours afterwards, and studies on angry political content link it to greater pessimism, tribalism, and distrust. That helps explain why people keep consuming rage content even when it ruins their entire day. It's giving them the neurochemical equivalent of a lift, followed by a slump. After a spike of high arousal emotion, people often experience a physiological crash, with stress responses that linger. Some researchers linked repeated exposure to high arousal negative content with higher stress markers over time and reduced resilience. So you get stuck in a cycle that feels eerily like addiction. You reach for outrage to feel stimulated, you feel worse afterwards, and then you reach for more because you've forgotten what calm feels like. And this is where it gets darker, when anger stops being about politics. Many people are not angry because politics is uniquely worse than it used to be. They're angry because anger has become their default setting. Psychologists sometimes describe hot cognition as the state where emotion overrides reasoning, and a permanent threat alert mindset makes people interpret normal disagreements as existential battles. That is why a supermarket bag policy, a celebrity post, a TikTok about dating, or a local council decision can suddenly become a national meltdown. Often it's not about the issue, it's about the pattern. Once outrage becomes habitual, the topic barely matters. The brain is primed to search for violations and threats, so it will find something. Studies have shown that people express more extreme emotions online than they feel in private because digital communication strips away the social cues, tone, body language, facial expressions that normally moderate emotion. When empathy cues disappear, people assume hostility more easily, even in messages that were not meant that way. In other words, the internet can generate anger out of thin air simply because ambiguity gets interpreted as bad faith. So what is outrage actually doing to us? The price we're paying is enormous. We become less persuadable, we interpret disagreement as hostility, we trust institutions less, we trust our neighbors less, we become more vulnerable to misinformation, we lose concentration, and we burn out emotionally. You can see it in the broader data on polarization, distrust, and mental health, and you can see it in daily life too. People are less patient, less charitable, and quicker to assume the worst. There's also an empathy cost. Some neuroimaging research has suggested that chronic exposure to sensationalist political content can dull the brain's response in regions associated with empathy and perspective taking. When everything feels like a threat, you lose the ability to see other people as complicated, and you start categorizing them as allies or enemies with nothing in between. Outrage doesn't only corrode politics, it corrodes the human ability to cooperate. The good news is that you can get off the outrage treadmill. Outrage isn't going anywhere because it's too profitable for that, but you can stop letting it live in your nervous system rent-free. The key isn't willpower, it's design. If you want your emotional life back, you need to change your default so you're not relying on moment-to-moment self-control. That means turning off push notifications, especially the breaking news ones that exist mostly to spike your attention. It means moving social apps off your home screen so opening them is a choice rather than a reflex. It can also mean logging out of platforms that feel compulsive or adding friction, like a delay before opening the apps that tend to hijack you. It also means curating your inputs like an adult. If someone's content reliably makes you angry without improving your understanding, you should cut it, even if you agree with them. Rage that doesn't lead to clarity is not education, it's agitation. If you want to reduce manipulation, it helps to consume more primary sources and fewer outrage interpretations. When possible, read the report, watch the full clip, and check the original data. The more you outsource your understanding to emotionally heated commentary, the more polarized and reactive you become. It also helps to replace doom scrolling with slower media. Podcasts, long-form writing, books, and documentaries are not perfect, but they're less dependent on shock value, and they tend to restore context and nuance because they have to. Most importantly, though, you should learn to recognize when you're being played. When you feel that spike of outrage, pause and ask yourself who benefits from that emotion, whether the content is designed for truth or engagement, and whether the clip is missing context. Rage bait loses power when you actually see the hook. And finally, you need an offline life that actually nourishes you. You don't need to move to a monastery, you just need real human input. Friends, routines, exercise, cooking, walking, community, and relationships that exist outside of the feed. The richer your offline world is, the less you crave online intensity because your brain is no longer starving for stimulation. There is also a concept called strategic ignorance, which sounds dramatic but is actually simply common sense. You don't need to know everything that happens everywhere instantly all the time. Our brains are not built for global emotional triggers, and you're allowed to choose what you engage with. Outrage is not going away because it's too profitable, but the difference between a society that can self-correct and one that tears itself apart is simple. Citizens have to know when they're being emotionally hijacked. We were not built to absorb the world's anger every single day, but you can relearn how to think clearly, feel proportionately, and disengage deliberately. We weren't built to absorb the world's anger every single day, but we can relearn how to think clearly, feel proportionately, and disengage deliberately.